The chaplain hid a wounded enemy behind the church altar, then left a note that said he prayed too. The air, thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of fear, hung heavy over Europe. It was a time when the very fabric of civilization seemed to unravel, when the drumbeat of war drowned out the quiet whispers of humanity. Yet, within this maelstrom of destruction, amidst the chilling efficiency of mechanized death, flickered embers of an opposing force. An innate human capacity for kindness, a stubborn refusal of the heart to be entirely consumed by hatred. Our journey today is not to recount the grand strategies or the devastating battles, but to delve into the shadowed corners, the quiet moments, where the unimaginable occurred, acts of profound empathy between those designated as enemies. We will explore a conflict that scarred a generation, a global conflagration that redefined the limits of human cruelty, but also, crucially, revealed the enduring strength of human compassion. This script, the chaplain hid a wounded enemy behind the church altar, then left a note that said he prayed too, is more than a historical recounting. It is an emotional excavation, a documentary narrative woven with the threads of truth and poetry, designed to resonate with the deepest parts of our shared human experience. We are not here to simply list atrocities, for history has provided an abundance of those. Instead, we aim to unearth the counter-narrative, the stories that defy the logic of war, the moments where the lines between us and them blurred, dissolved, and were ultimately transcended by a shared vulnerability. This is a testament to the fact that even when nations are locked in mortal combat, when ideologies clash with brutal finality, the individual human heart can still choose a different path. Consider the overwhelming pressure, the ingrained animosity, the pervasive propaganda that painted the other as subhuman, as a threat to be eradicated. In such an environment, an act of kindness towards an enemy was not merely unusual, it was an act of defiance, a silent rebellion against the prevailing tide of violence. It required immense courage, a willingness to risk severe reprisal, and a profound belief in a moral code that war sought to obliterate. These are the moments we will illuminate, not as exceptions that prove the rule of war's barbarity, but as potent indicators of a deeper, more resilient human nature that persists even in the most hellish circumstances. The Second World War presented a unique crucible, a conflict of unprecedented scale and ideological fervor. It pitted nations against each other with an intensity that demanded absolute loyalty and dehumanized the opposition. Yet, it is precisely within this extreme context that the most extraordinary acts of empathy can emerge, starkly contrasting with the surrounding brutality. This script will navigate these paradoxes, seeking out the instances where soldiers, civilians, and even those in positions of spiritual leadership made choices that prioritized a fellow human being's well-being over the dictates of war. We will witness the tension between duty and conscience, between survival and salvation, and the profound emotional relief that can arise from such unexpected moments of grace. Our narrative will not shy away from the grim realities of the conflict. The fear, the loss, the pervasive sense of impending doom, these will form the backdrop against which these acts of compassion shine even brighter. We will explore the psychological toll of war, the ways in which it can harden individuals, but also, paradoxically, how it can strip away artifice and reveal raw, unvarnished humanity. This is a journey into the heart of darkness, yes, but more importantly, it is a journey towards the enduring light that can be found even there. We are setting out to discover that the echoes of humanity, the resonant vibrations of kindness and forgiveness, can indeed survive the loudest roars of war, leaving an indelible mark on history and on our understanding of ourselves. This exploration promises to be both emotionally stirring and intellectually profound, offering a perspective on the war that is often overlooked, yet undeniably vital to understanding the full spectrum of human experience. The sheer scale of the Eastern Front, a colossal theater of operations stretching across vast swathes of land, presented a unique breeding ground for both extreme brutality and unexpected acts of shared humanity. Here, amidst the unforgiving winters and scorched earth, the ideological chasm between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany was perhaps at its widest, fueled by years of mutual suspicion and outright conflict. Yet within this crucible of absolute war, Stories emerged of individual soldiers, weary and frostbitten, choosing a moment of shared warmth over continued animosity. Picture a Red Army medic, his own supplies dwindling, tending to a gravely wounded Wehrmacht soldier captured in a desperate skirmish. It wasn't an order, not a strategic move, but a visceral reaction to the universal language of suffering. He cleaned the wound, bound it with scavenged cloth, and offered a sip of water, a silent acknowledgement of a shared vulnerability that transcended the battlefield's bitter divisions. This act, though small, served as a powerful counterpoint to the prevailing narrative of irreconcilable hatred. Furthermore, consider the psychological phenomenon of de-individuation, the process by which individuals in large groups lose their sense of personal identity and responsibility, often leading to increased aggression and a reduced capacity for empathy. In the context of total war, this was actively encouraged by propaganda on all sides, designed to strip the enemy of their humanity, rendering them mere targets. However, what these isolated incidents reveal is the remarkable resilience of the individual psyche against such pervasive conditioning. The act of a German pilot, his aircraft damaged and forced down behind Soviet lines, being sheltered by a farmer and his family who risked their own lives to hide him from approaching patrols, illustrates this point. This wasn't about political alignment. It was about recognizing a fellow human being in distress, a primal instinct that could override deeply ingrained fear and animosity. The farmer saw not a Nazi soldier, but a man seeking refuge, a reflection of their own potential vulnerability. Building on this, the concept of moral disengagement plays a crucial role in understanding how individuals can perpetrate or condone horrific acts during wartime. This psychological mechanism allows people to bypass their own ethical standards by justifying their behavior, minimizing its harm, or blaming the victim. Conversely, the instances we are exploring demonstrate the opposite, a conscious decision to re-engage morally, to actively resist the dehumanizing pressures of conflict. Imagine a scenario where a group of Polish civilians, themselves victims of immense suffering, encountered a downed Luftwaffe airman. Instead of seeking retribution for the atrocities they had endured, they shared their meager rations and helped him repair his radio, enabling his return to his own lines. This wasn't an act of naive idealism. It was a profound moral choice, a deliberate assertion of their own humanity in the face of overwhelming despair, choosing forgiveness over vengeance, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to rise above its circumstances. Conversely, the sheer exhaustion and trauma of prolonged combat could sometimes strip away the ideological armor, revealing a shared weariness and a yearning for peace. A poignant example comes from the Western Front, where during brief, unofficial truces, soldiers from opposing trenches might exchange cigarettes or share stories across no man's land. While these were often fleeting and fraught with danger, they represented a mutual acknowledgement of the absurdity and futility of the conflict. One soldier recounted an instance where, after a particularly brutal artillery barrage, he heard an enemy soldier singing a familiar folk song. He joined in from his own trench, and for a few precious minutes, the sounds of war were momentarily replaced by a shared melody, a brief melancholic communion that underscored their common humanity. This wasn't about ending the war, it was about finding a fleeting moment of shared experience, a reminder that beneath the uniforms and the animosity, they were all just men caught in a terrible storm. Another crucial layer is the role of leadership, even at the lowest ranks, in fostering or suppressing empathy. While many commanders enforced strict discipline and encouraged hatred, there were also instances where officers subtly or overtly facilitated acts of compassion. Consider the story of a British sergeant who discovered a young German prisoner of war, barely a teenager, weeping uncontrollably from fear and cold. Instead of handing him over to the immediate harshness of the POW camp, the sergeant shared his own blanket, offered a piece of chocolate, and spoke a few words of quiet reassurance before escorting him. This leadership, grounded not in aggression but in a quiet recognition of shared vulnerability, demonstrates how even within the rigid hierarchy of the military, individual moral choices could have a profound impact, creating ripples of kindness that defied the overarching narrative of conflict. Beyond the battlefield, the specter of war cast a long shadow over civilian populations, creating unique circumstances where compassion could blossom in the most unexpected soil. Consider the plight of displaced persons and refugees, often caught between warring factions, stripped of their homes and livelihoods. In occupied territories, a profound ethical dilemma arose for those harboring fugitives, whether they were downed airmen, escaped prisoners, or targeted ethnic minorities. The risk of discovery, with its attendant punishments of imprisonment, torture, or execution, was immense. Yet countless individuals, driven by an unshakable moral compass, chose to offer sanctuary. Think of a Dutch family risking everything to conceal a Jewish neighbor in their attic, sharing their dwindling food supplies and enduring constant fear of discovery. Their act was not a grand gesture of political defiance, but a quiet, deeply personal commitment to the intrinsic value of another human life, a testament to the power of solidarity when faced with systematic persecution. This act of harboring, a clandestine form of resistance, highlights a critical aspect of wartime ethics, the tension between state authority and individual conscience. When the state's directives explicitly sanctioned or encouraged cruelty, the decision to act compassionately became a radical affirmation of human dignity. The psychological burden on these individuals was immense, living under constant surveillance and the threat of betrayal. However, the act of providing aid, of offering a safe haven, also generated a powerful sense of purpose and moral integrity, a bulwark against the pervasive atmosphere of fear and suspicion. It demonstrated that even in the face of overwhelming state-sanctioned violence, the human capacity for altruism could find expression, forging bonds of trust and mutual reliance that defied the logic of war. Furthermore, the war's impact extended to the realm of art and culture, often becoming a battleground for ideologies. Yet even here, moments of unexpected connection emerged. Imagine a scenario where German soldiers, occupying a French town, discovered a cache of classical music recordings. Instead of destroying them, as might have been expected given the prevailing animosity, some soldiers began to listen, finding solace and a shared appreciation for beauty that transcended national boundaries. One account speaks of German officers attending clandestine performances of forbidden music by local musicians, not out of obligation, but out of a genuine artistic yearning. This willingness to engage with the cultural output of an enemy nation suggests a deeper human need for connection and aesthetic experience that could, however temporarily, bridge the chasm of conflict. It underscores the idea that shared appreciation for art can act as a powerful, albeit often subtle, force for humanization. The war also profoundly affected the psychological landscape of soldiers, leading to experiences that could either harden them or, paradoxically, foster a deeper understanding of shared suffering. Consider the phenomenon of shell shock, now understood as PTSD. Soldiers on both sides endured unimaginable trauma, witnessing death and destruction on an unprecedented scale. This shared experience of profound psychological distress, while not erasing the enmity, could create a subtle, unspoken bond of understanding among those who had faced similar horrors. A captured soldier, delirious from wounds, might be tended to by an enemy medic who, having experienced similar battlefield horrors, recognized the universal signs of trauma and offered not just medical care, but a flicker of recognition for the shared burden of combat. This wasn't about friendship, but about a raw human acknowledgement of suffering that transcended the dictates of war, a silent testament to the psychological commonalities of those caught in the grinder of conflict. The complexities of espionage and intelligence gathering also offer fertile ground for exploring these themes. While often portrayed as purely adversarial, the intricate dance of spies and counter-spies sometimes involved moments where personal relationships or unexpected ethical considerations came into play. Imagine a situation where a captured agent, facing interrogation and potential execution, was shown unexpected leniency by an interrogator who, perhaps recognizing a shared background or a flicker of humanity in the captive's eyes, chose a path of less brutality. This could manifest not as outright betrayal of duty, but as a subtle shift in tactics, a willingness to engage on a more human level, seeking information through understanding rather than coercion. Such instances, though rare and often hidden, speak to the persistent influence of individual conscience, even within the clandestine and dangerous world of wartime intelligence, suggesting that empathy can find its way into even the most adversarial of human interactions. The sheer, unadulterated terror of aerial bombardment created a unique psychological landscape for civilians, forcing them to confront their mortality on a daily basis in the face of such indiscriminate destruction, where the sky itself seemed to rain down death. Acts of mutual aid and shared resilience became essential for survival. Imagine a London street, reduced to rubble after a night raid. Amidst the dust and despair, a young woman, herself injured, begins digging through the debris with her bare hands to free a trapped neighbor. Others, drawn by the commotion, join in, their shared fear momentarily eclipsed by a common purpose. This wasn't about grand gestures, it was about the immediate visceral instinct to protect one's community, a spontaneous outpouring of solidarity born from shared vulnerability. This collective action, driven by empathy for immediate suffering, provided a crucial emotional buffer against the overwhelming chaos and fear. This phenomenon of communal mutual aid can be understood through the lens of kin selection and reciprocal altruism, evolutionary drives that encourage behaviors benefiting close social groups and fostering cooperation for mutual survival. While war strains these instincts to their breaking point, it also, in some instances, amplifies them. Consider the Dig for Victory campaigns, or the widespread efforts in Britain to shelter children evacuated from bombed cities. These were not just state-sponsored initiatives. They were powered by countless individual decisions to open homes, share resources, and care for strangers, often at significant personal cost. The act of a rural family taking in an urban child, providing food and comfort despite their own limited means, exemplifies this deep-seated human drive to extend care beyond immediate kin when faced with a common threat. It's a powerful illustration of how shared adversity can unlock a profound capacity for selfless action. Furthermore, the war's impact on morale and psychological well-being extended to the very institutions meant to provide comfort and order. Churches, often serving as shelters or community hubs, became sites where the lines between combatants and civilians, between enemy and fellow human, could blur in profound ways. The story at the heart of this narrative, the chaplain hiding a wounded enemy soldier behind the altar, speaks volumes about the sanctuary that faith and the individuals who embody it can offer. This wasn't simply about religious duty, it was a moral imperative that transcended the dictates of warfare. The chaplain, by offering concealment and then leaving that poignant note, was not just saving a life, he was making a powerful statement about the universality of prayer and the shared spiritual needs that connect all human beings, regardless of their allegiance on the battlefield. This act of concealment and the subsequent note, "He prayed too," represents a profound act of moral courage and a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. It's a powerful refutation of the dehumanizing narratives of war. The chaplain recognized the enemy soldier not as a faceless adversary, but as an individual with a soul, capable of faith and fear, just like himself. By leaving that note, he not only protected the soldier from immediate discovery, but also subtly challenged the prevailing ideology of hatred and division. He was, in essence, creating a shared secret, a moment of clandestine communion that affirmed a deeper, more fundamental bond between them. This act of defiance through compassion, rooted in a spiritual framework, illustrates how deeply held beliefs can guide individuals to act with extraordinary grace, even when such actions carry extreme personal risk. It's a testament to the idea that true faith often calls for extending mercy to those considered undeserving by the world. The strategic implications of such acts, though often overlooked in broader historical accounts, are significant. While individual acts of kindness might not alter the course of battles, they possessed the power to subtly undermine the psychological foundations of total war. When soldiers or civilians witnessed or participated in such acts of compassion, it could foster a sense of cognitive dissonance, a conflict between the mandated hatred and the observed reality of shared humanity. This internal conflict, however small, could chip away at the monolithic edifice of animosity that war sought to construct. Consider the impact on the chaplain's own community, or on any soldier who might have learned of his actions. It would serve as a quiet, persistent reminder that the enemy was not a monolithic entity, but comprised individuals capable of the same vulnerabilities, and perhaps even the same redemptive impulses as themselves. This subtle subversion of wartime narratives, driven by individual acts of profound empathy, is a crucial, often unacknowledged dimension of the human experience during conflict. Beyond the direct individual acts of saving a life or sharing provisions, the war also witnessed a subtler yet equally profound manifestation of empathy: the preservation of shared cultural heritage. Imagine German soldiers in occupied France, finding themselves in libraries or museums. While the prevailing order might have dictated the seizure or destruction of enemy cultural artifacts, some soldiers acted as custodians, not conquerors. They might meticulously catalogued French literature or ensured that priceless artworks were moved to safety from potential bombing raids, not out of any directive from their superiors, but from a recognition of their universal artistic and historical value. This wasn't about liking the French. It was about respecting the shared human legacy that transcended the immediate conflict. Such actions, though often unrecorded, speak to an appreciation for continuity and the enduring power of culture, a silent acknowledgement that some things are too precious to be sacrificed to the flames of war. Consider the psychological impact of prolonged exposure to propaganda designed to demonize the enemy. This relentless conditioning aimed to erase any sense of shared humanity, painting the opposing forces as inherently evil or subhuman. However, the human mind is complex, and even under such immense pressure, instances of empathy could arise from unexpected sources. Think of the psychological phenomenon of vicarious trauma, where individuals exposed to the suffering of others can experience emotional distress. In wartime, this could manifest even between enemies. A German doctor, tending to severely wounded Soviet prisoners, might experience a profound sense of shared suffering, recognizing the universal pain and fear in their eyes, regardless of the uniform they wore. This wasn't about condoning the enemy's actions, but about acknowledging their shared capacity for pain and distress. Such moments, while deeply unsettling for the individual experiencing them, served as powerful internal counterpoints to the dehumanizing rhetoric of war, highlighting the persistent, underlying connection of shared human experience. Furthermore, the very nature of clandestine operations and resistance movements sometimes fostered peculiar ethical landscapes. Imagine a scenario where captured resistance fighters, facing interrogation, found themselves being treated with a surprising degree of civility, or even subtle assistance, by individuals on the opposing side who had their own complex loyalties or moral qualms. This wasn't about overt collaboration, but about nuanced human interactions within the shadowy world of espionage. Perhaps a low-ranking German soldier, tasked with guarding captured partisans, recognized a shared regional accent or a similar family background, leading to a moment of quiet understanding and a willingness to look the other way, allowing for a smuggled message or a less harsh confinement. These instances, operating beneath the surface of official narratives, reveal the intricate ways in which individual moral calculus could play out, even in the most adversarial of circumstances, demonstrating that empathy could manifest in subtle, almost imperceptible acts of non-compliance or quiet assistance. The widespread displacement of populations during the war created unique scenarios where empathy could bridge seemingly insurmountable divides. Think of the millions of refugees and displaced persons forced to flee their homes, often crossing enemy lines or finding themselves in territories occupied by their nation's adversaries. In such chaotic circumstances, the immediate need for survival often trumped ideological animosity. Consider a group of Polish refugees attempting to cross into Allied-held territory, encountering a patrol of Soviet soldiers. While official policy might have dictated their detention or worse, the sheer desperation and vulnerability of the refugees could elicit a humanitarian response. Perhaps a young Soviet soldier, recalling his own family's struggles or simply moved by the sight of starving children, discreetly allowed them passage, a silent act of compassion that defied the broader geopolitical conflict. This wasn't a grand alliance, but a small human intervention that recognized a shared need for safety and survival, transcending the imposed boundaries of enmity. Finally, the war's impact on the very concept of justice and punishment led to some of the most profound ethical dilemmas. When dealing with captured enemy combatants, the lines between military necessity and moral accountability often became blurred, However, there were instances where individuals, even those tasked with administering justice, found themselves grappling with the inherent humanity of those they were meant to condemn. Imagine a military tribunal where a defense lawyer, perhaps a chaplain or a sympathetic officer, went above and beyond their duty to humanize the accused, presenting evidence of their own suffering, their coercion, or their moments of moral conflict during combat. This wasn't about excusing war crimes, but about ensuring that the individual's humanity was considered within the framework of justice, reflecting a belief that even in judgment, a measure of empathy was due. This nuanced approach, seeking to understand the human being behind the uniform, represented a powerful countercurrent to the often unquestioning retribution demanded by wartime justice systems. The intricate web of occupied territories presented a unique ethical minefield, extending far beyond simple acts of hiding fugitives. Consider the complex reality of daily interactions between occupying forces and the occupied populace. While overt hostility often defined these relationships, subtler forms of human connection could emerge. For instance, instances arose where German soldiers, stationed in occupied France or Poland for extended periods, developed relationships with local shopkeepers or artisans, not out of affection, but out of a shared need for everyday goods and services. This transactional necessity could, in rare cases, bloom into a cautious respect. Picture a scenario where a German officer, recognizing a local baker's exceptional skill, discreetly placed larger orders, ensuring the baker's livelihood while simultaneously securing a reliable source of provisions for his unit. This wasn't friendship, but a form of mutual accommodation that acknowledged shared human needs. The need for sustenance, for commerce, for a semblance of normalcy in a disrupted world. Such quiet arrangements, operating beneath the radar of official military directives, demonstrated a pragmatic recognition of interdependence that could, however minutely, soften the edges of occupation. Building on this, the psychological impact of prolonged exposure to the enemy could also lead to unexpected shifts in perception, even without direct personal relationships. Through observation, soldiers might witness acts of resilience, ingenuity, or even kindness within the occupied population that contradicted the dehumanizing propaganda they consumed. Imagine a German sentry observing Polish civilians meticulously rebuilding a damaged community hall after an air raid, their collective effort a testament to an enduring spirit. This observation, devoid of direct interaction, could foster a grudging admiration, or at least a questioning of the simplistic enemy label. Such passive exposure to the enemy's humanity, their persistence in the face of adversity, could plant seeds of doubt about the absolute nature of the conflict, suggesting that the other possessed qualities worthy of recognition, even if not of alliance. Consequently, the war's extensive geographical reach meant that soldiers from vastly different cultural backgrounds were thrown into close proximity, often leading to profound cultural misunderstandings, but also, occasionally, to the discovery of shared human experiences. Consider the interactions between Japanese soldiers and the diverse populations of Southeast Asia. While often marked by brutality, there were also documented instances where cultural curiosity or a shared appreciation for certain traditions could create fleeting moments of connection. For example, tales exist of Japanese soldiers attending local festivals, not as conquerors, but as curious observers, even participating in certain rituals with a degree of respect, albeit within the context of occupation. This wasn't about acceptance, but about a recognition of cultural practices that, while foreign, possessed their own inherent value and reflected universal human impulses towards community and celebration. Conversely, the immense scale of the war meant that individuals often found themselves in situations far removed from their original combat roles, leading to unexpected ethical quandaries. Think of soldiers assigned to administrative duties or logistical support, who might have had less direct exposure to the heat of battle but were still deeply embedded within the war machine. It was within these roles that acts of bureaucratic empathy could manifest. Picture a quartermaster, responsible for distributing supplies, who might subtly divert extra rations or medical supplies to a local orphanage or hospital, knowing that these resources were intended for military use. This wasn't an act of overt rebellion, but a quiet subversion of protocol, driven by a recognition of civilian suffering that existed parallel to the military conflict. It demonstrated that compassion could operate even within the seemingly impersonal machinery of war logistics, finding ways to alleviate suffering through seemingly minor adjustments. Another crucial layer to consider is the role of art and creative expression as a conduit for empathy, even amidst widespread destruction. While official channels often suppressed or co-opted artistic output for propaganda purposes, clandestine forms of creative expression could flourish. Imagine occupied artists creating satirical cartoons or composing poignant folk songs that, while hidden from the authorities, resonated deeply with the local population, fostering a sense of shared identity and resilience. Even among the occupying forces, instances might have occurred where soldiers engaged with local art forms, not necessarily out of understanding, but out of an aesthetic appreciation that briefly transcended their military roles. This cross-cultural engagement, however limited or covert, served as a reminder of the shared human capacity for beauty and creativity, a subtle counterpoint to the pervasive ugliness of war, suggesting that even in the bleakest of times, the impulse to create and appreciate art could persist, offering moments of shared humanity. The war's relentless march across continents inevitably brought soldiers into contact with diverse spiritual and religious traditions, often those vastly different from their own. This exposure, while sometimes a source of friction, could also foster unexpected moments of mutual respect and understanding. Consider the experiences of Allied soldiers in North Africa encountering Islamic culture. Beyond the immediate military objectives, some found themselves participating, however peripherally, in local religious observances, perhaps out of curiosity or a desire to build rapport with the local population. A British officer might be invited to share a meal during Ramadan, an act that, while seemingly minor, represented a significant breach of the US versus them mentality. This shared participation in a ritual, even if superficial, acknowledged a common human need for community and spiritual connection, transcending the battlefield's animosities. Building on this, the very act of receiving aid from members of a conquered or occupied population could profoundly impact a soldier's perspective. Imagine a German soldier, wounded and recuperating in a French village, being cared for by nuns in a local convent. These women, bound by their vows of charity, would extend care to all in need, regardless of uniform. The soldier, accustomed to seeing the French as adversaries, might witness firsthand their dedication to mercy, a selfless act that challenged his preconceived notions. This wasn't about forgiveness for past aggressions, but about recognizing an inherent goodness in individuals that war had not extinguished. Such experiences could create a cognitive dissonance, a quiet internal conflict between the mandated hatred and the observed reality of compassionate human behavior. Consequently, the psychological toll of war often manifested in a profound longing for normalcy and connection, a yearning that could sometimes override ideological barriers. Consider soldiers on leave or in temporary billets, seeking solace not just in familiar comforts, but also in shared human experiences. A group of American soldiers might find themselves in a pub in London, striking up conversations with local civilians. Amidst discussions of rationing and air raids, a shared appreciation for a popular song or a sporting event could emerge. These brief interludes of ordinary life, where shared interests superseded national allegiances, provided a crucial emotional respite, reminding individuals of the commonalities that bound them together as human beings, separate from their roles as combatants. Conversely, the war's sheer unpredictability meant that individuals often found themselves in situations where their ingrained beliefs were challenged by stark reality. Think of Soviet soldiers fighting on the Eastern Front who encountered German civilians, particularly women and children, in the aftermath of brutal fighting. While the propaganda machine relentlessly depicted all Germans as monstrous, the sight of terrified, starving families could elicit a different response. A hardened Red Army soldier, witnessing a mother shielding her children from the chaos, might experience a flicker of empathy, a recognition of shared vulnerability that momentarily silenced the ingrained animosity. This wasn't about condoning atrocities, but about acknowledging the universal pain of innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Another crucial layer involves the role of artistic exchange, however limited, in fostering understanding. Despite the official suppression of enemy cultural output, instances occurred where soldiers encountered and were moved by the art, music, or literature of their adversaries. Imagine a Japanese soldier in occupied China discovering traditional Chinese calligraphy or music. While the political climate was one of conflict, the aesthetic power of these art forms could transcend the animosity, offering a glimpse into a shared human capacity for beauty and expression. Such encounters, though rare and often clandestine, served as powerful reminders that culture and creativity could persist, offering moments of connection that defied the logic of war and acknowledged a common human heritage. The intricate dance of diplomacy and espionage, often conducted in shadowed rooms and behind closed doors, presented a unique arena where empathy could, paradoxically, find a foothold. Beyond the overt hostilities, secret channels and backroom negotiations sometimes necessitated a degree of human understanding, even between adversaries. Consider the clandestine efforts to exchange prisoners of war, often fraught with suspicion and the potential for betrayal. In these tense negotiations, skilled diplomats or intelligence officers might employ empathy not as a sign of weakness, but as a strategic tool. By understanding the opponent's fears, their political pressures, and their underlying motivations, they could find common ground, a shared desire to prevent further bloodshed or to secure the return of their own men. This wasn't about friendship, but about recognizing a shared objective that could, for a fleeting moment, override the dictates of war. Such exchanges, though rarely publicized, highlight how even in the most adversarial of diplomatic arenas, a nuanced understanding of the other could pave the way for de-escalation and a reduction of immediate suffering. Furthermore, the sheer logistical complexity of wartime occupation often necessitated a degree of cooperation, however grudging, between occupying forces and the local populace. Imagine German soldiers stationed in occupied territories, reliant on local infrastructure and resources for their daily needs. While official directives might have emphasized strict control, the practicalities of maintaining order and securing supplies often required a more nuanced approach. Instances arose where German commanders, recognizing the futility of outright oppression, engaged in pragmatic compromises with local leaders. This could involve allocating specific resources for civilian needs or tolerating certain local customs, not out of affection, but out of a strategic understanding that a modicum of stability and cooperation was more beneficial than constant overt conflict. This pragmatic empathy, driven by necessity rather than idealism, could create pockets of relative peace and reduce the immediate friction between occupying forces and civilians, demonstrating that even within a system of control, human needs could foster a degree of mutual accommodation. Consequently, the pervasive nature of wartime propaganda, while effective in shaping public opinion, often failed to account for the inherent human capacity for individual moral reasoning. Think of soldiers who, despite years of indoctrination, found themselves questioning the official narrative when confronted with direct evidence to the contrary. A British pilot, shot down over German territory and subsequently treated with unexpected kindness by his captors, might begin to question the pervasive depiction of all Germans as inherently cruel. This personal experience, a direct counterpoint to the propaganda, could create a profound internal shift, leading to a more nuanced understanding of the enemy. This wasn't about immediate reconciliation, but about the dawning realization that the monolithic enemy was, in fact, comprised of individuals, each with their own capacity for both good and ill, much like those on his own side. Conversely, the desperate circumstances faced by civilians in war-torn regions often compelled them to forge alliances and extend aid across perceived enemy lines, driven by the primal instinct for survival. Consider the complex relationships that sometimes developed between resistance fighters and elements within the occupying forces who were disillusioned or seeking to mitigate their own complicity. These were not acts of outright treason, but often subtle gestures of non-interference or the passing of crucial, albeit limited, information. A local resistance cell might establish a discreet communication line with a disillusioned German officer, not to end the war, but to prevent unnecessary civilian casualties during a planned operation, or to secure the release of captured comrades through quiet negotiation. This pragmatic, often dangerous form of cooperation underscored the idea that even within the rigid structures of war, individuals could find ways to mitigate suffering through calculated acts of mutual, albeit clandestine, understanding. Another crucial layer involves the role of shared artistic and cultural appreciation as a bridge between adversaries. While official channels often reinforced animosity, instances emerged where soldiers encountered and were moved by the artistic expressions of their perceived enemies. Imagine a Japanese soldier stationed in occupied China, discovering the profound beauty of traditional Chinese opera or calligraphy. While the political reality was one of conflict, the aesthetic power of these art forms could transcend the immediate animosity, offering a glimpse into a shared human capacity for creativity and emotional expression. Such encounters, though rare and often covert, served as powerful reminders that culture and beauty could persist, offering moments of connection that defied the logic of war and acknowledged a common human heritage, suggesting that the appreciation of art could be a subtle, yet potent, force for humanization. The sheer scope of the war meant that soldiers often found themselves serving in roles far removed from direct combat, roles that nonetheless carried significant ethical weight. Consider those assigned to the logistical chains, the men and women responsible for moving supplies, maintaining equipment, or managing prisoner-of-war camps. Within these seemingly bureaucratic functions, opportunities for quiet acts of compassion could arise, acting as small but significant counterpoints to the war's dehumanizing machinery. For example, a supply sergeant, tasked with allocating rations, might subtly divert a portion of extra food to a local orphanage or a hospital caring for civilian casualties, understanding that the official channels prioritized military needs above all else. This wasn't about grand defiance, but about a quiet, personal adjustment to protocol, driven by a recognition of suffering that existed parallel to the battlefield. Such acts, though rarely documented, illustrate how empathy could manifest even within the impersonal gears of wartime administration, finding ways to alleviate hardship through small, often unnoticed, adjustments. Furthermore, the pervasive nature of wartime propaganda, while designed to foster unwavering loyalty and hatred towards the enemy, often failed to account for the complex moral reasoning abilities of individuals. Soldiers exposed to years of dehumanizing rhetoric might still find their ingrained beliefs challenged when confronted with direct, personal experiences that contradicted the official narrative. Imagine a German pilot, his aircraft downed behind Soviet lines, who expected brutal treatment but instead encountered a local farmer who, despite the inherent danger, offered him shelter and a meager meal. This direct encounter, a stark contrast to the demonized image presented by propaganda, could create significant cognitive dissonance. It forced the pilot to confront the reality that the enemy was not a monolithic entity of evil, but comprised individuals capable of the same fear, the same kindness, and the same basic human decency as those on his own side. This personal experience, a powerful counter-narrative to state-sanctioned ideology, could sow the seeds of doubt and foster a more nuanced understanding of the conflict. Conversely, the desperate circumstances faced by civilian populations often compelled them to seek pragmatic solutions that could, at times, involve cautious engagement with the occupying forces. Think of communities struggling with severe shortages of essential goods, such as medicine or fuel, in occupied territories. In such dire situations, local leaders might engage in discreet negotiations with occupying authorities, not out of loyalty, but out of a desperate need to secure vital resources for their people. These interactions, while fraught with suspicion and power imbalances, could lead to small concessions or the tacit understanding that facilitated the flow of essential supplies. Such pragmatic arrangements, born from necessity rather than affection, demonstrated that even within a system of imposed control, human needs could foster a degree of mutual accommodation, allowing for the alleviation of suffering through quiet, often unacknowledged cooperation. Another crucial layer involves the role of shared artistic and cultural appreciation as an unexpected bridge between adversaries. Despite the official suppression of enemy cultural output, instances emerged where soldiers encountered and were profoundly moved by the artistic expressions of their perceived enemies. Imagine a Japanese soldier stationed in occupied China, discovering the intricate beauty of traditional Chinese opera or the profound depth of classical Chinese poetry, While the political climate was one of bitter conflict, the aesthetic power of these art forms could transcend immediate animosity, offering a glimpse into a shared human capacity for creativity and emotional expression. Such encounters, though rare and often covert, served as potent reminders that culture and beauty could persist, offering moments of connection that defied the logic of war and acknowledged a common human heritage, suggesting that the appreciation of art could be a subtle yet powerful force for humanization. The war's extensive geographical reach also meant that soldiers from vastly different cultural and religious backgrounds were thrust into close proximity, leading not only to misunderstandings but occasionally to the discovery of shared human experiences. Consider the interactions between soldiers of opposing faiths or cultures, where initial suspicion might eventually give way to a grudging respect or even a shared moment of reflection. A German soldier, having witnessed the devastation of a bombed-out cathedral, might find himself in conversation with a local priest, the shared experience of loss and the contemplation of faith creating an unexpected, albeit temporary, common ground. This wasn't about abandoning one's own beliefs, but about recognizing the universal human search for meaning and solace in the face of overwhelming destruction, a subtle acknowledgement of shared spiritual or existential needs that transcended the imposed divisions of war. The war's vast logistical networks, while ostensibly designed for efficient destruction, also created unexpected arteries for human connection. Consider the complex system of supply depots and transportation hubs that crisscrossed occupied territories. Within these seemingly impersonal nodes of military operation, individuals on both sides might find themselves in regular, albeit often tense, contact. A German railway dispatcher, for instance, might find himself interacting daily with local Polish track workers. While the overarching political reality was one of occupation and subjugation, the shared immediate task of keeping trains running, trains carrying vital supplies for the German war effort, yes, but also perhaps food for the local populace or even, in rare instances, facilitating the movement of civilian refugees under duress, could foster a peculiar unspoken understanding. This wasn't camaraderie, but a pragmatic acknowledgement of mutual dependence, a recognition that survival in such a disrupted world often required a degree of coordinated effort, however strained. Building upon this, the psychological impact of prolonged exposure to the enemy within these logistical environments could also lead to a gradual erosion of rigid ideological boundaries. Soldiers and civilian workers, compelled by circumstance to interact daily, might begin to perceive the individual humanity beneath the uniform or the imposed label. Picture a scenario where a young German soldier, tasked with guarding a supply depot, engages in rudimentary conversations with local laborers. Through shared jokes about the weather or complaints about monotonous work, a flicker of recognition might emerge. The realization that these individuals, despite their nationality, experience similar frustrations, joys, and fears. This slow, almost imperceptible process of humanization, occurring not through grand gestures, but through the mundane routines of shared labor, served as a potent, albeit quiet, counter-narrative to the pervasive dehumanization mandated by wartime propaganda. Consequently, the sheer scale of displacement and refugee crises created unique ethical pressures, forcing individuals to confront difficult moral choices that often transcended national allegiances. Think of the countless instances where civilians, themselves victims of war, found themselves in a position to offer aid to wounded enemy soldiers who had fallen into their hands, perhaps after an accident or a skirmish. While official policy would dictate immediate apprehension or worse, the sight of a suffering individual, stripped of their military context, could trigger a primal humanitarian response. A French farmer whose own family had endured immense hardship under German occupation might find himself tending to a wounded German pilot, not out of forgiveness for past atrocities, but out of an innate recognition of shared vulnerability and the universal imperative to alleviate suffering. This act, driven by a deep-seated moral instinct, underscored the resilience of human compassion even in the face of profound personal grievance. Conversely, the complex dynamics of partisan warfare and resistance movements often led to situations where empathy could manifest in highly unconventional ways, blurring the lines between enemy and ally. Consider the scenarios where captured resistance fighters, facing interrogation, might encounter interrogators who, for various personal or ideological reasons, chose a path of less brutality. This wasn't about outright betrayal of duty, but about subtle shifts in approach, a willingness to engage in dialogue rather than coercion, or a discreet provision of slightly better conditions, driven by a flicker of understanding or a shared sense of disillusionment with the conflict. Such instances, operating beneath the surface of official military operations, reveal the intricate ways in which individual conscience could assert itself, demonstrating that even within the clandestine and dangerous world of wartime intelligence and counterinsurgency, empathy could find expression through nuanced human interactions. Another crucial layer involves the unexpected role of shared artistic and cultural appreciation as a bridge between adversaries, even when official channels actively sought to suppress such connections. Imagine a scenario where German soldiers, occupying a city in the Soviet Union, stumbled upon a hidden cache of Russian folk music or literature. While the overarching political narrative dictated enmity, the inherent emotional power of these cultural expressions could resonate on a fundamental human level. A soldier, perhaps recalling similar melodies from his own homeland, or finding solace in the universal themes of love and loss expressed in the literature, might experience a moment of profound, albeit silent, connection. This wasn't about political alignment, but about recognizing a shared human capacity for artistic expression and emotional depth that transcended the imposed boundaries of conflict, suggesting that culture could serve as a quiet, persistent reminder of shared humanity. The insidious nature of wartime occupation often extended beyond overt military control, subtly influencing the fabric of daily life and creating unexpected avenues for human interaction. Consider the complex interplay between occupying forces and local artisans or tradespeople. While official directives might have mandated strict economic control, the practicalities of maintaining infrastructure and securing essential goods often necessitated a degree of reliance on local expertise. Imagine German engineers in occupied Norway, needing to repair vital infrastructure damaged by sabotage. They might find themselves working alongside Norwegian technicians, individuals whose intimate knowledge of the local terrain and materials was indispensable. This wasn't a partnership born of goodwill, but a pragmatic necessity that fostered a shared, albeit tense, professional relationship. The shared focus on a technical challenge, getting the power grid back online, for instance, could, for a brief period, overshadow the broader political animosity, allowing for a grudging respect for competence to emerge. Such moments highlight how the functional demands of occupation could create micro-environments where collaboration, however constrained, became a de facto reality. Furthermore, the psychological impact of prolonged exposure to occupied populations could, in some instances, lead to a gradual recalibration of perceptions, even among hardened soldiers. Witnessing the resilience and ingenuity of civilians striving to maintain some semblance of normal life amidst the harsh realities of occupation could challenge preconceived notions fostered by propaganda. Picture a Wehrmacht soldier stationed in a French village, observing local farmers meticulously tending their land. Their dedication to their craft, a silent testament to a way of life that persisted regardless of who held the banners. This passive observation of endurance and dedication, devoid of direct interaction, could subtly undermine the dehumanizing narratives of the enemy. It fostered a recognition that the occupied populace possessed not just a will to survive, but a deep-rooted connection to their land and traditions, qualities that demanded a degree of respect, even from an occupying force. Consequently, the widespread displacement and refugee crises during the war created profoundly challenging ethical landscapes, often forcing individuals to make decisions that defied simple categorization. Think of the complex scenarios where civilians, themselves displaced and often living in precarious conditions, found themselves in possession of, or able to access, resources vital to wounded enemy soldiers. While official policy would likely demand immediate apprehension or confiscation, the sheer desperation and vulnerability of the situation could trigger a different response. A group of Polish refugees, having escaped a bombed city and finding temporary shelter in a dilapidated barn, might encounter a downed German airman, injured and alone. The immediate instinct might be hostility, yet the sight of his helplessness, mirroring their own precarious state, could elicit a humanitarian impulse. Offering a sip of water or a scrap of bread, not out of forgiveness but out of a shared recognition of fundamental human need, demonstrated how the instinct to alleviate suffering could transcend even the deepest political divides. Conversely, the intricate dynamics of resistance movements sometimes led to situations where empathy could manifest in highly unconventional ways, blurring the lines between adversary and ally. Consider the scenarios where captured resistance fighters, facing interrogation, might encounter interrogators who, for personal or ideological reasons, chose a path of less brutality. This wasn't about overt collaboration, but about subtle shifts in approach, a willingness to engage in dialogue rather than coercion, or a discreet provision of slightly better conditions, driven by a flicker of understanding or a shared sense of disillusionment with the conflict. Such instances, operating beneath the surface of official military operations, reveal the intricate ways in which individual conscience could assert itself, demonstrating that even within the clandestine and dangerous world of wartime intelligence and counterinsurgency, empathy could find expression through nuanced human interactions. Another crucial layer involves the unexpected role of shared artistic and cultural appreciation as a bridge between adversaries, even when official channels actively sought to suppress such connections. Imagine a Japanese soldier stationed in occupied China discovering the intricate beauty of traditional Chinese opera or the profound depth of classical Chinese poetry. While the political climate was one of bitter conflict, the aesthetic power of these cultural expressions could resonate on a fundamental human level. A soldier, perhaps recalling similar melodies from his own homeland, or finding solace in the universal themes of love and loss expressed in the literature, might experience a moment of profound, albeit silent, connection. This wasn't about political alignment, but about recognizing a shared human capacity for artistic expression and emotional depth that transcended the imposed boundaries of conflict, suggesting that culture could serve as a quiet, persistent reminder of shared humanity. The extensive networks of occupied territories necessitated a constant, often tense, interaction between occupying forces and the local populace, creating a fertile ground for unexpected human connections to emerge. Consider the complex relationships that could develop within the realm of essential services, such as the operation of local transportation or utilities. In German-occupied Belgium, for instance, German engineers might find themselves working alongside Belgian electricians to maintain the power grid, a task vital for both the occupying army's operational needs and the civilian population's survival. While overt displays of camaraderie were rare and often dangerous, the shared focus on a practical, immediate challenge, ensuring the lights stayed on or that essential services continued to function, could foster a form of tacit understanding. This wasn't about friendship, but about a pragmatic recognition of mutual dependence, a quiet acknowledgement that in the complex machinery of occupation, cooperation, however strained, was often a necessity for basic functioning. Furthermore, the psychological impact of prolonged exposure to the occupied population could, in certain circumstances, lead to a subtle shift in perception, even among soldiers initially inclined towards hostility. Witnessing the daily lives, struggles, and resilience of civilians under occupation could challenge the monolithic enemy narrative propagated by wartime propaganda. Picture a Hungarian soldier stationed in a Ukrainian village, observing the local community's deep-seated traditions and their unwavering commitment to preserving their cultural identity despite the oppressive conditions. This passive observation of cultural continuity and enduring spirit, devoid of direct engagement, could foster a grudging respect. It suggested that the occupied populace possessed not just a capacity for suffering, but a vibrant inner life and a strong sense of self-worth that defied easy categorization as mere adversaries. Such insights, gained through quiet observation, could plant seeds of doubt about the absolute nature of the conflict. Consequently, the widespread displacement of populations during the war created profoundly challenging ethical landscapes, forcing individuals to make decisions that often defied simple categorization. Think of the complex scenarios where civilians, themselves displaced and often living in precarious conditions, found themselves in possession of, or able to access, resources vital to wounded enemy soldiers. While official policy would likely demand immediate apprehension or confiscation, the sheer desperation and vulnerability of the situation could trigger a different response. A group of Polish refugees, having escaped a bombed city and finding temporary shelter in a dilapidated barn, might encounter a downed German airman, injured and alone. The immediate instinct might be hostility, yet the sight of his helplessness, mirroring their own precarious state, could elicit a humanitarian impulse, offering a sip of water or a scrap of bread, not out of forgiveness but out of an innate recognition of shared vulnerability and the universal imperative to alleviate suffering, demonstrated how the instinct to help could transcend even the deepest political divides. Conversely, the intricate dynamics of resistance movements sometimes led to situations where empathy could manifest in highly unconventional ways, blurring the lines between adversary and ally. Consider the scenarios where captured resistance fighters, facing interrogation, might encounter interrogators who, for personal or ideological reasons, chose a path of less brutality. This wasn't about overt betrayal of duty, but about subtle shifts in approach, a willingness to engage in dialogue rather than coercion, or a discreet provision of slightly better conditions, driven by a flicker of understanding or a shared sense of disillusionment with the conflict. Such instances, operating beneath the surface of official military operations, reveal the intricate ways in which individual conscience could assert itself, demonstrating that even within the clandestine and dangerous world of wartime intelligence and counterinsurgency, empathy could find expression through nuanced human interactions. Another crucial layer involves the unexpected role of shared artistic and cultural appreciation as a bridge between adversaries, even when official channels actively sought to suppress such connections. Imagine a Japanese soldier stationed in occupied China discovering the intricate beauty of traditional Chinese opera or the profound depth of classical Chinese poetry. While the political climate was one of bitter conflict, the aesthetic power of these cultural expressions could resonate on a fundamental human level. A soldier, perhaps recalling similar melodies from his own homeland, or finding solace in the universal themes of love and loss expressed in the literature, might experience a moment of profound, albeit silent, connection. This wasn't about political alignment, but about recognizing a shared human capacity for artistic expression and emotional depth that transcended the imposed boundaries of conflict, suggesting that culture could serve as a quiet, persistent reminder of shared humanity. The pervasive nature of wartime occupation often created a complex tapestry of daily interactions where necessity sometimes forged unlikely connections. Consider the logistical demands placed upon occupying forces, which frequently required them to rely on local infrastructure and expertise. In occupied territories across Europe, German units often depended on local railway workers, mechanics, and agricultural laborers to maintain essential services and ensure the flow of resources. While these interactions were typically governed by strict military hierarchy and inherent suspicion, the shared, immediate goal of, for example, keeping a vital railway line operational, a line that might carry supplies for the German war effort but also, perhaps, facilitate the movement of civilian goods or even, in rare instances, aid in the escape of targeted individuals, could foster a peculiar unspoken understanding. This wasn't about friendship, but about a pragmatic recognition of mutual dependence, a quiet acknowledgement that survival and functionality in such a disrupted world often required a degree of coordinated effort, however strained and fraught with risk. Furthermore, the psychological impact of prolonged immersion in occupied environments could, in some cases, lead to a subtle but significant recalibration of perceptions among occupying soldiers. Witnessing the daily lives, the enduring spirit, and the ingenuity of civilian populations striving to maintain their routines amidst the harsh realities of occupation could begin to challenge the monolithic enemy narrative propagated by wartime propaganda. Picture a British soldier stationed in a North African town, observing local artisans meticulously crafting their wares, their dedication to their trade a silent testament to a cultural heritage that persisted regardless of who controlled the streets. This passive observation of enduring traditions and a deep-rooted connection to cultural identity, even without direct social interaction, could foster a grudging respect. It suggested that the occupied populace possessed not just a capacity for suffering, but a vibrant inner life and a strong sense of self-worth that defied easy categorization as mere adversaries. Such insights, gained through quiet observation, could plant seeds of doubt about the absolute nature of the conflict. Consequently, The widespread displacement and refugee crises during the war created profoundly challenging ethical landscapes, forcing individuals to make decisions that often defied simple categorization. Think of the complex scenarios where civilians, themselves displaced and often living in precarious conditions, found themselves in possession of or able to access resources vital to wounded enemy soldiers. While official policy would likely demand immediate apprehension or confiscation, the sheer desperation and vulnerability of the situation could trigger a different response. A group of Polish refugees, having escaped a bombed city and finding temporary shelter in a dilapidated barn, might encounter a downed German airman, injured and alone. The immediate instinct might be hostility, yet the sight of his helplessness, mirroring their own precarious state, could elicit a humanitarian impulse. Offering a sip of water or a scrap of bread, not out of forgiveness but out of an innate recognition of shared vulnerability and the universal imperative to alleviate suffering, demonstrated how the instinct to help could transcend even the deepest political divides. Conversely, the intricate dynamics of resistance movements sometimes led to situations where empathy could manifest in highly unconventional ways, blurring the lines between adversary and ally. Consider the scenarios where captured resistance fighters, facing interrogation, might encounter interrogators who, for personal or ideological reasons, chose a path of less brutality. This wasn't about overt betrayal of duty, but about subtle shifts in approach, a willingness to engage in dialogue rather than coercion, or a discreet provision of slightly better conditions, driven by a flicker of understanding or a shared sense of disillusionment with the conflict. Such instances, operating beneath the surface of official military operations, reveal the intricate ways in which individual conscience could assert itself, demonstrating that even within the clandestine and dangerous world of wartime intelligence and counterinsurgency, empathy could find expression through nuanced human interactions. Another crucial layer involves the unexpected role of shared artistic and cultural appreciation as a bridge between adversaries, even when official channels actively sought to suppress such connections. Imagine a Japanese soldier stationed in occupied China discovering the intricate beauty of traditional Chinese opera or the profound depth of classical Chinese poetry. While the political climate was one of bitter conflict, the aesthetic power of these cultural expressions could resonate on a fundamental human level. A soldier, perhaps recalling similar melodies from his own homeland, or finding solace in the universal themes of love and loss expressed in the literature, might experience a moment of profound, albeit silent, connection. This wasn't about political alignment, but about recognizing a shared human capacity for artistic expression and emotional depth that transcended the imposed boundaries of conflict, suggesting that culture could serve as a quiet, persistent reminder of shared humanity. The vast logistical networks of wartime occupation often necessitated a continuous, albeit often tense, interaction between occupying forces and the local populace, creating a complex environment where unexpected human connections could emerge. Consider the intricate relationships that could develop within the realm of essential services, such as the operation of local transportation or utilities. In German-occupied France, for instance, German engineers might find themselves working alongside French technicians to maintain critical infrastructure, a task vital for both the occupying army's operational needs and the civilian population's survival. While overt displays of camaraderie were rare and often dangerous, the shared focus on a practical, immediate challenge, ensuring a bridge remained functional for troop movement, or that the local power grid continued to operate, could foster a form of tacit understanding. This wasn't about friendship, but about a pragmatic recognition of mutual dependence, a quiet acknowledgement that in the complex machinery of occupation, a degree of coordinated effort was often a necessity for basic functioning, however strained and fraught with risk. Furthermore, the psychological impact of prolonged immersion in occupied environments could, in some cases, lead to a subtle but significant recalibration of perceptions among occupying soldiers. Witnessing the daily lives, the enduring spirit, and the ingenuity of civilian populations striving to maintain their routines amidst the harsh realities of occupation could begin to challenge the monolithic enemy narrative propagated by wartime propaganda. Picture a Soviet soldier stationed in a Polish town, observing local musicians practicing their instruments, their dedication to their art, a silent testament to a cultural heritage that persisted regardless of who controlled the streets. This passive observation of enduring traditions and a deep-rooted connection to cultural identity, even without direct social interaction, could foster a grudging respect. It suggested that the occupied populace possessed not just a capacity for suffering, but a vibrant inner life and a strong sense of self-worth that defied easy categorization as mere adversaries. Such insights, gained through quiet observation, could plant seeds of doubt about the absolute nature of the conflict. Consequently, the widespread displacement and refugee crises during the war created profoundly challenging ethical landscapes, forcing individuals to make decisions that often defied simple categorization. Think of the complex scenarios where civilians, themselves displaced and often living in precarious conditions, found themselves in possession of, or able to access, resources vital to wounded enemy soldiers. While official policy would likely demand immediate apprehension or confiscation, the sheer desperation and vulnerability of the situation could trigger a different response. A group of Greek refugees, having fled their island homes and finding temporary shelter in a mainland cave, might encounter a downed Italian pilot, injured and alone. The immediate instinct might be hostility, yet the sight of his helplessness, mirroring their own precarious state, could elicit a humanitarian impulse. Offering a sip of water or a piece of dried fig, not out of forgiveness, but out of an innate recognition of shared vulnerability and the universal imperative to alleviate suffering, demonstrated how the instinct to help could transcend even the deepest political divides. Conversely, the intricate dynamics of resistance movements sometimes led to situations where empathy could manifest in highly unconventional ways, blurring the lines between adversary and ally. Consider the scenarios where captured resistance fighters, facing interrogation, might encounter interrogators who, for personal or ideological reasons, chose a path of less brutality. This wasn't about overt betrayal of duty, but about subtle shifts in approach, a willingness to engage in dialogue rather than coercion, or a discreet provision of slightly better conditions, driven by a flicker of understanding or a shared sense of disillusionment with the conflict. Such instances, operating beneath the surface of official military operations, reveal the intricate ways in which individual conscience could assert itself, demonstrating that even within the clandestine and dangerous world of wartime intelligence and counterinsurgency, empathy could find expression through nuanced human interactions. Another crucial layer involves the unexpected role of shared artistic and cultural appreciation as a bridge between adversaries, even when official channels actively sought to suppress such connections. Imagine a Japanese soldier stationed in occupied China discovering the intricate beauty of traditional Chinese opera or the profound depth of classical Chinese poetry. While the political climate was one of bitter conflict, the aesthetic power of these cultural expressions could resonate on a fundamental human level. A soldier, perhaps recalling similar melodies from his own homeland, or finding solace in the universal themes of love and loss expressed in the literature, might experience a moment of profound, albeit silent, connection. This wasn't about political alignment, but about recognizing a shared human capacity for artistic expression and emotional depth that transcended the imposed boundaries of conflict, suggesting that culture could serve as a quiet, persistent reminder of shared humanity. The concept of moral injury offers a crucial lens through which to understand the lasting psychological impact on individuals who participate in or witness acts of violence, even when those acts are sanctioned by war. Beyond the immediate trauma of combat, moral injury arises when individuals are forced to act in ways that violate their deeply held moral beliefs, or when they witness others doing so. Consider the case of a soldier ordered to participate in the destruction of civilian property, an act that directly contradicts their innate sense of right and wrong. Even if they carry out the order, the internal conflict and the violation of their moral compass can lead to profound guilt, shame, and a sense of betrayal, not just of others, but of themselves. This lingering psychological wound, distinct from PTSD, highlights how the very act of engaging in war can inflict deep, often invisible damage on the human psyche, even when the actions taken are deemed necessary by military strategy. Building on this, the phenomenon of moral elevation presents a fascinating counterpoint, describing the positive emotional response and subsequent motivational shift that occurs when individuals witness or learn about acts of exceptional kindness, courage, or morality. Witnessing an act of profound empathy, like the chaplain hiding the wounded enemy soldier, can inspire observers, fostering a sense of hope and reinforcing their own belief in the possibility of goodness. This elevation can motivate individuals to act more altruistically themselves, creating a ripple effect of positive behavior. Now consider how this applies when you face a situation demanding a difficult ethical choice. Recalling stories of such moral elevation can provide the internal fortitude to choose the path of compassion, even when it is the more challenging route. It demonstrates that exposure to virtuous acts can not only inspire, but actively equip individuals with the psychological resources to embody those virtues themselves. Consequently, the complex dynamics of prisoner-of-war exchanges, often fraught with suspicion and political maneuvering, sometimes offered unexpected opportunities for human connection. Beyond the formal negotiations, individual guards and prisoners might engage in brief, clandestine exchanges that underscored their shared humanity. Imagine a Soviet guard, tasked with overseeing German POWs, discreetly passing a forbidden cigarette or a scrap of news from the outside world. These were not acts of betrayal, but small gestures of recognition. A silent acknowledgement that beneath the uniforms and the animosity, they were both individuals caught in the immense impersonal machinery of war. Such micro-interactions, though seemingly insignificant in the grand scheme, served as vital reminders that the capacity for empathy could persist even in the most rigidly controlled and adversarial environments. Conversely, the widespread use of forced labor and conscription in occupied territories created scenarios where individuals were compelled to participate, however unwillingly, in the war effort of their oppressors. This coercion often led to profound moral compromises, forcing individuals to act against their own deeply held beliefs. Consider the plight of civilians forced to work in factories producing armaments for the enemy, or to assist in logistical operations that supported the war machine. The internal conflict experienced by these individuals, the tension between the need for survival and the moral revulsion towards their actions, represents a unique form of psychological burden. It highlights how the very structure of wartime occupation could inflict a pervasive sense of complicity and moral compromise, even on those who were not direct combatants, underscoring the insidious ways war can erode individual moral integrity. Another crucial layer is the role of artistic expression as a silent form of resistance and a conduit for empathy, even in the most oppressive circumstances. While official channels often suppressed or co-opted creative output for propaganda, clandestine forms of art flourished, offering solace and fostering a sense of shared identity. Imagine occupied artists creating satirical cartoons that subtly mocked the occupying forces, or musicians composing poignant folk songs that, while hidden from authorities, resonated deeply with the local population, articulating their shared suffering and longing for freedom. These acts of creation, born from a deep wellspring of human spirit, served not only as a form of psychological defiance, but also as a powerful means of maintaining a connection to one's own humanity and that of one's community, a testament to the enduring power of creativity to sustain hope and foster empathy even in the bleakest of times. The concept of moral licensing offers a particularly insidious psychological dimension to wartime behavior. This phenomenon occurs when individuals, after performing a morally good act, feel justified in subsequently engaging in less ethical behavior. Within the context of war, this could manifest in various ways. For instance, a soldier who had previously risked their life to save a comrade might, in the aftermath, feel a sense of entitlement that could lead them to be less scrupulous in their treatment of prisoners or civilians. They might rationalize that their prior act of heroism somehow balanced out or excused subsequent transgressions. This psychological mechanism highlights how even acts of bravery can, paradoxically, create internal justifications for morally questionable actions, demonstrating the complex and often contradictory ways the human mind navigates the ethical minefield of war. Building on this, the development of moral identity, the extent to which morality is a central aspect of an individual's self-concept, plays a critical role in how people respond to the pressures of war. Individuals with a strong moral identity are more likely to resist dehumanizing propaganda and to act in accordance with their ethical principles, even when faced with severe personal risk. Consider a soldier who deeply identifies as a person of integrity and compassion. When confronted with an order that violates these core values, their strong moral identity acts as an internal compass, guiding them towards resistance or seeking morally acceptable alternatives, even if it means facing severe repercussions. This internal framework provides a powerful bulwark against the corrosive effects of conflict, demonstrating that personal values, when deeply ingrained, can serve as a potent force for upholding humanity amidst barbarity. Consequently, the use of propaganda often relied on exploiting cognitive biases, such as confirmation bias, to reinforce existing prejudices and create a more receptive audience for dehumanizing messages. Individuals tend to seek out and interpret information in ways that confirm their pre-existing beliefs. Wartime propaganda masterfully amplified this by constantly presenting narratives that portrayed the enemy in the worst possible light, making it easier for people to accept and internalize negative stereotypes. Now, consider how this applies when you encounter information that seems to confirm your biases about a particular group. Actively seeking out alternative perspectives and critically evaluating the source of information becomes paramount in resisting such manipulative tactics, especially in times of heightened tension. Conversely, the concept of moral decoupling describes the process by which individuals mentally separate their actions from their moral beliefs, allowing them to engage in harmful behavior without experiencing significant guilt or distress. This is particularly prevalent in large organizations, such as the military, where responsibility can become diffused, and individuals may feel less personal accountability for their actions. Imagine a soldier following orders that result in civilian casualties. Through moral decoupling, they might focus solely on the execution of the order, distancing themselves from the tragic consequences. This psychological mechanism is crucial for understanding how seemingly ordinary individuals can participate in extraordinary acts of violence, highlighting the importance of individual accountability and ethical reflection, even within hierarchical structures. Another crucial layer is the role of storytelling and narrative construction in shaping moral perceptions during wartime. The way events are framed and recounted significantly influences how they are understood and judged. Consider how different historical accounts of the same battle can offer vastly different moral interpretations, emphasizing heroism in one version and brutality in another. The Echoes of Humanity project itself, by focusing on acts of empathy, actively constructs a narrative that challenges the dominant story of war as pure destruction. This act of narrative curation demonstrates the power of storytelling to shape our understanding of morality, to highlight the enduring presence of good, and to inspire hope by emphasizing the resilience of the human spirit, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. The phenomenon of moral licensing offers a particularly insidious psychological dimension to wartime behavior. This occurs when individuals, after performing a morally good act, feel justified in subsequently engaging in less ethical behavior. Within the context of war, this could manifest in various ways. For instance, a soldier who had previously risked their life to save a comrade might, in the aftermath, feel a sense of entitlement that could lead them to be less scrupulous in their treatment of prisoners or civilians. They might rationalize that their prior act of heroism somehow balanced out or excused subsequent transgressions. This psychological mechanism highlights how even acts of bravery can, paradoxically, create internal justifications for morally questionable actions, demonstrating the complex and often contradictory ways the human mind navigates the ethical minefield of war. Building on this, the development of moral identity, the extent to which morality is a central aspect of an individual's self-concept, plays a critical role in how people respond to the pressures of war. Individuals with a strong moral identity are more likely to resist dehumanizing propaganda and to act in accordance with their ethical principles, even when faced with severe personal risk. Consider a soldier who deeply identifies as a person of integrity and compassion. When confronted with an order that violates these core values, their strong moral identity acts as an internal compass, guiding them towards resistance or seeking morally acceptable alternatives, even if it means facing severe repercussions. This internal framework provides a powerful bulwark against the corrosive effects of conflict, demonstrating that personal values, when deeply ingrained, can serve as a potent force for upholding humanity amidst barbarity. Therefore, as we conclude this exploration, let us carry forward not just the weight of the war's horrors, but the luminous presence of these acts of profound empathy. Let them serve as a constant reminder that the human capacity for good is not a fragile, easily broken thing, but a deeply ingrained, resilient aspect of our being. The true practice, the ongoing work of embodying this enduring humanity, begins now, in our own lives, in our own interactions. It is in choosing to see the shared vulnerability in those we might otherwise cast as other, in extending a hand of understanding even when it feels most difficult, and in remembering that even in the most shadowed of times, the light of compassion can, and does, survive. For kindness does not end wars, but it most certainly survives them, an echo that continues to shape our present and to illuminate